Comcon countries had quite diversified industry. They had car industry, they had some high-tech industry, they had agriculture, etc., etc. But their asset base was quite obsolete and non-competitive compared to the Western one. And definitely they had lots of insufficiency in infrastructure. And if you read this, and if you project this to 2017 or 2016, you'll see that Iran fits perfectly into the same picture. It's the same 80 million people in the country. It's the same GDP per capita at about 1/3 of EU level. It's the same highly educated population which is enthusiastic to consume. It's the same diversified industry and agriculture with obsolete asset base. Some insufficiency in infrastructure. So, as we know now, the Eastern Europe, Central Europe is now one of the most dynamic regions of the world, one of the most dynamic economies together. So most probably Iran will go along the same or very close trajectory in the coming 20 and 25 years. By 2042, it can well be world's top 15 economy and a very important regional economic player. Just if we look through the key statistics, Iran has about 1.3 trillion of GDP by purchase power parity, which will put it in global top 20. The nominal GDP is about 3 times smaller, and then Iran is about 28th position. But this relation of purchase power parity to nominal GDP is quite characteristic for certain period of growth of economy. China had about the same 10 years ago. So it means that the local currency is undervalued, and it gives certain competitive advantages to local manufacturers. By GDP per capita, the country is number 96 in the world, more or less in the middle. If we look through the basic indexes or basic indicators, you see that the country is not having very high positions. But when we'll go quickly through the composition of those indexes, you'll see that the country has very certain strength alongside certain weaknesses. GDP dynamics, the country had a drop in GDP since 2011, and it had a period of negative growth, now returning back to quite quick positive growth. So there was an economic crisis induced in a sense by international sanctions. Now the crisis is hopefully over and the country is back to growth. If we go through the indicators like ease of doing business, Iran is close to Brazil or Ecuador or Barbados. It has strengths enforcing contracts, getting construction permits, starting a business. It has quite positive dynamics. It was up one position year on year, but there are weaknesses like paying taxes, resolving insolvency, protecting minority investments, trading across the borders. In global competitiveness, Iran is close to Uruguay, Morocco, or once again Brazil. It has strength in market size, it has strength in what they call basic requirements, but weaknesses in efficiency of finance and labor markets. But it was quite quickly growing. It was up from 83rd position, so it was up almost 10 positions within 1 year. There is Global Entrepreneurship Index. Once again, Iran was close to Morocco, also Libya and Georgia, with strengths in startup skills and technology absorption, in speed of growth, with quite good dynamics, and weaknesses obviously in internationalization, also risk acceptance and product innovation. Global Innovation Index, Iran was a bit low in uncharacteristic company of countries like Mali or Namibia, which I would say is not a proper context for a country which has a nuclear program or for a country which has its own space program, quite successful one. There are certain strengths. It's number one in the world in terms of graduates in science. It's number 6 in the world in terms of gross capital formation as related to GDP. It's overall strong in human capital and research, and probably we'll get back to this when we'll discuss, when we'll have our Iranian colleagues discussing the high-tech businesses opportunities later today. It has research growth FTE quite high. But weaknesses are in institutions, in trade and competition, and in knowledge absorption. But you can see also very high positive dynamics. And finally, what characterizes the country overall development is Human Development Index. Iran shares the 69th place with Costa Rica, being close to Cuba, Lebanon, and Venezuela. And, well, Venezuela is also heavy oil exporting country with some socialist ideas and some socialist, say, track in development right now. Iran is very strong in life expectancy. It's very strong in expected years of schooling. It's dynamically growing. And two weaknesses are inequality and unemployment. And unemployment is really a big problem for the economy right now. And there is also what you would call misemployment, like many of the educated young people would work taxi drivers or would work hotel porters or would work positions which are not up to their education. And this is obviously a challenge. The youth unemployment is very high, and this is one of the key challenges of the economy, and probably the thing that international business can bring to the country is jobs and good quality job places. So the three trends that will be driving Iran economy in the coming years, I would call diversification, modernization, and privatization. Diversification is about getting away from oil dependency and getting multidimensional, strong economy all across the sectors. Modernization happens in infrastructure, it happens in industrial assets, and it's very visible in digital economy in Iran like elsewhere in the world. And privatization is not only about the state stepping gradually out of economy and selling some state-owned enterprises. It's also about more and more private initiative in sectors like healthcare or education, as I have demonstrated in the clips. This initiative is quite unusual, I would say, by the standards of the region or the standards by the historical track of the country. And it opens very big, new, attractive markets. Speaking about oil dependency, Iran is in world's top 10, but what they call oil and gas rent combined, actually. It's close to countries like Oman or Azerbaijan. It's not the number one in the world, which is Kuwait, but overall there are some countries in the region, like, for example, United Arab Emirates, which have lower share of oil rent or lower dependency on oil and gas exports. Yet, economy is definitely diversifying, and in a sense, it's more diversified compared to some regional peers. So here you see Iran, Turkey, UAE, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. And you see that Iran has the highest share of agriculture across the region. It has slightly lower share of services because of this. And in terms of industry, it's quite comparable to its peers. Like Turkey or UAE or Saudi Arabia. Iran is a very mighty agricultural country, being in the top positions in the world as exporter of many agricultural products. It's number one, like in pistachios, caviar, saffron, stone fruits, berries. Number two in the world in dates and apricots. Number three in watermelons and cherries, etc., etc., etc. So there are massive opportunities in the country's agriculture for exports and also for local consumption. With increasing private initiative and private presence in the segments, and with Christopher, we've been to a very beautiful village close to, I guess, Shahrekord, And we talk to people who are doing quite decent living by producing nuts, producing pistachios, producing certain fruits. And the thing is that you can, according to Islam norm, whoever brings the desert to life owns this plot of land. So people are investing into bringing water to deserted parts, deserted plots of land, then they own it, and then they have gardens and they sell the produce even to the Tehran or other markets. On the other hand, what you see there is the whole thing is running in a very traditional way. I mean, in terms of logistics, in terms of how supply chain works, it has massive potential for optimization, which will probably come because we'll touch upon this. The whole thing about retail trade and getting products, even agricultural products, to the end consumer in an efficient and modern way, it's not yet there. It's not there yet. Speaking about one of the indicators of diversification of the economy is Iran is ahead of Italy in terms of number of cars manufactured in the country. It's number 18 in the world, actually, and it has mighty car industry. It also has some original, natural, local defense industry, for example, including some high-tech development. As I said, it has space program, it has nuclear program. So the country's industry is quite strong. But did I skip something? No, sorry. The country needs to get modernized. The period when it was restricted in its access to quality international equipment, for example, quality international technologies. Christopher spoke about country being restricted into the access to air equipment, for example, to the modern planes or spare parts. But this happened in virtually every segment of the industry. We've been to a factory, we talked to the factory owner and general director, and he has to stock about 1 year of 1 year worth of spare parts, because he never knows if he will be able to import spare parts for his equipment in the next month. So he has to buy something from Chinese, for example, while he would prefer to buy from Germans, but he has problems with handling transactions with Germans. And it's not necessarily the problems with buying. Probably people would want to sell to him, but then he has problem with financing the deals because German banks would be reluctant to work with money from Iran. So he has to be very creative in putting money through to the final destination. So all this is handicapping the competitiveness of Iran industry, which on the other hand is playing an important role in the region. And the factory we've been to is exporting to Iraq, is exporting to Pakistan, is exporting to Afghanistan, to the places where many of the major international companies would be reluctant to export or to market to. Iran, as I said, is one of the leading countries in the world in terms of STEM graduates and people studying science. In terms of, even in terms of absolute numbers, Iran is number 5 in the world. If you recalculate it back to the population, Iran will be number 1 in terms of relative numbers. E-commerce, and I don't want to steal the stage from a colleague who will speak about digital, but e-commerce is really booming in the country. You can see that out of the total population of 80 million, 56 million are internet users, and many are active social media users. Though the social media are somehow restricted, many of the international social media are somehow restricted in the country. People are very skillful in using VPN to get online to Facebook or Twitter or something like this. And you have more mobile subscriptions than you have the population, and you have active mobile social users, quite a lot of them. many people made online purchase, airline tickets, hotel bookings, electronics, clothing, insurance, media products, everything. So you see that figures are like half of the population is purchasing something online. It's a big digital market. And the country's biggest e-commerce is called e-commerce platform is called Digicolor. It is valued at some 150 million US dollar, which is not probably very impressive on the international scale, but it's really big for the country, for the market. And this is a factory we visited, and it's producing very beautiful home appliances at amazingly low prices. I mean, you can buy refrigerator for $100 or washing machine for below $100. And they're exporting all across the region to Afghanistan, to Iraq, now starting to export to Africa. But if you go through the factory, you see that the equipment is really about 10 years old, 15 years old. There's lots of Chinese equipment, and Chinese are filling the niche. But as we talked to the director, he would definitely say that he would definitely prefer to buy from Germany, because German industrial equipment he considers to be the best in class for his facilities, but he is very much restricted in opportunities to do this. So if you expand this to the whole of the country's industry, and there's big industry in the country, very diversified industry in the country, you'll see that this industry needs massive overhaul of assets. And this is probably one of the major opportunities for German businesses, because Germany is known as the prime destination for all types of industrial equipment, facilities, etc. Privatization. The state is gradually withdrawing from the economy, and it boosts the consumer market. So you can see the Iran consumer spending in billions of real. There was a sharp rise in 2014, and overall the trend is very positive. So despite the sanctions, despite some social changes, we mentioned inequality, we mentioned unemployment. Despite this, the consumer spending is really booming. And what's important, that the age composition of the population makes 30% of the consumers, 60% of the consumers are below 30 years of age. So Iran is a very, very young country, which means that this trend will go on and go on, because people will get a bit older, they will get married, they will have children, they will have houses. So the trend of consumer spending really sees no end, no ceiling in Iran. This is the picture of the skating ring in the private school, as I've showed you some clips. So the private healthcare and education are the very quickly growing segments, together with housing. And 70% of Iranians own their homes, so it's really a very big market of housing, all types of it, from small houses, personal houses, to apartments, condominiums. And then there are Western brands which are very much in demand, despite all the ideological or political tensions of this history of political and ideological split with the West. And it was a surprise to me to find out that Coca-Cola has never left the market, and you can buy Coke or Sprite or Fanta all across Iran. There are some very creative imitations of the Western retail chains, like ZFC in Isfahan, which definitely looks like KFC, but it is not. And it's selling pizzas, among other things, which KFC doesn't sell. And you can see a modern type of electronics, consumer electronics shop, and Iranians are really very keen on all things which we say beep and which do something electronically. So, sort of wrapping up this and probably getting into some Q&A and the interactive section. Putting on a hat of a businessman or business analytics, if a person from abroad, from Europe or from Russia, a business person will come to me and ask what are the specific opportunities in the country, where should I invest, which would not be that obvious, because everybody knows that you can go to oil, but it's quite difficult to invest in Iranian oil. You have to get major contract with state-owned company, etc. But speaking about the opportunities which are really open to the private businesses and quick private deals, I would say there are probably much more of them, but 4 industries spring into my mind. Insurance, for a few reasons. The share of insurance premium to GDP in the country is very low. It's just 1%, which is 10 times below the average of OECD. So despite the fact that the country has thousands of years of history of commerce and thousands of years of history of finance, now the insurance sector is really underdeveloped. And unlike the banking sector, which is heavily controlled by the state, and the biggest private bank is probably number 20 in terms of assets, 60% of insurance market is private. So private companies can really play big in this market segment. You don't need to compete with the state money. There is cultural tradition and cultural habit of saving. Many people save in gold, many people save in cash and foreign currencies, etc., which can easily be converted into life insurance policies and life insurance products. And basically we've seen this in Russia. Many companies bringing international practices of life insurance were very successful in the market, like AIG, which is now MetLife, for example, or Alico from Aviva from the UK. They came to the market with modern insurance products and they established their presence in the market. Another big one is retail. You've seen this picture of driving through the streets of Tehran, and you see lots of retail, but it's mostly small retail and very traditionally organized retail. You don't really see that much of modern malls, like Metro, for example, or I don't know, IKEA, mega malls, these type of things, which would store plenty of brands which will combine clothes retail, electronics retail, food retail. You don't see that much, for example, of gasoline station networks. And I mean, there are some, but they basically serve gasoline, while in the West, gasoline station has probably 30% of its income coming from gasoline, and the rest is coming from food and from selling small things and catering to the people, etc. So the biggest retail network in the country, which is Refah supermarkets, has just 160 outlets. And you compare these to Turkey, which has massive national retail chains like Beam, for example, which has almost 5,000 stores on comparable geography and comparable number of consumers. Or Migros has almost 1,500 stores, once again, on comparable geography. So, and this gives you the sense of how much the retail in the country can be developed in the coming years. And once again, if we look back to the benchmark or the example of Eastern Europe or Russia, we've seen all this. We've seen international retailers coming to the market back in late 1990s and establishing very dominant presence on the market. So now we do have big retail chains which originated in Russia, but we also do have big retail chains which came from abroad. Some did establish initial presence and then sold out to the international players. So there's really big opportunities in retail. It's very competitive segment in developed markets, but here in Iran you can do very many things greenfield. Then I would say IT consulting and services. If we assume that the country's industry needs to overhaul its assets, needs to modernize itself, to get competitive on an international scale, one of the things within this would be to buy modern IT systems like ERP, CRM, MAS, etc., etc. You'll need to computerize the whole thing. And the country is abundant on the IT talent. Very many people know programming. There are plenty of people who can do things in programming, but as I know from my own experience, to do a massive installation of a business computer system, you need not only programming skills, but you need also skills in business analytics, in change management, etc., etc. It's a very complex thing to computerize a modern industrial enterprise. And these skills you cannot just sit down and invent. You need experience in this. And the major international players like Oracle or IBM or Microsoft are quite restricted into importing those skills from the market to the market. So probably there is once again a massive niche for smaller international players coming probably from Europe. And Germany is home to one of the biggest business software companies of the world, which is SAP. And Germany has one of the most developed SAP ecosystems in the world. People who know how to run SAP, how to install SAP, how to train SAP users, etc., etc. So it's quite an opportunity for German business to get into this part. And finally, the stock market. It's on more speculative side, but it's really very interesting. And in our group with Christopher, we had a very seasoned stockbroker from Australia who was actually retired. He was over 60, but he would say that were I 20 years younger, I would drop everything and come to Iran because it's huge opportunities in the stock market. The market cap to GDP ratio is 27%. It's quite low by the standards of the region. You can compare it to Qatar, which is 88, India, which is 76, Jordan, which is 71. So you can see the potential of growth of market capitalization of Iranian market. And actually, Iranian companies have very solid business indicators. Their average net profit margin is 13%, which is twice as high as the average for Fortune 500 company. So Iranian companies are really quite profitable and quite well managed, but they are massively undervalued. Their PE ratio, price to earning ratio, is just 6, which is 3 times lower than average for a New York Stock Exchange company. So once again, you can see there's potential for exponential growth. So if you bring this PE ratio to 18 for Iranian companies, this will mean that the market cap will grow 3 times. So it's really good time. It's a real window of opportunities to be there. So this is quick analysis. You see the reports we've published a few months ago about Iran, which give more detailed information and some more figures and some more facts about Iranian economy. And I guess me and Christopher will be happy to take questions now and probably discuss some things interactively with you. So if you have questions, if you have comments, please feel free to ask. Yes? Yeah, that's a very big question. I mean, it's so big that I don't know how to really start to tap it, because there is big literature, big economic literature on the role of inequality and its relation to economic development. And there are basically 2 schools, like always in economy. One says that certain level of inequality, or even certain increase in the level of inequality, is unavoidable at a certain stage of economic development. So basically, first you get rich, and then you start to bridge this inequality gap, because if you are not rich enough, fighting inequality will not be productive for economy. The other school, and it's also quite a influential one, says that you should try to cap the inequality even as you get richer, because inequality has very important social and economic consequences, and growing inequality can handicap your opportunities to further economic growth. And I personally would tend to agree with the second school more than with the first. And I think that while growing, and this is probably one of the mistakes of the Eastern European and especially Russian economy, which is historically explainable, but one of the mistakes was made in 1990s, was not fighting or was not monitoring and trying to keep the inequality gap more or less narrow, which brought very undesired social consequences, especially in Russia, and which we will still feel now in the Russian economy, like lack of trust between the actors, etc. So I'm not probably in the position of giving advice, but I would say that what I see now, Iran sees inequality as a problem and is trying to address this, and is developing measures to, let's say, at least control this income gap between the poor and the rich. And I think it's a good point and good direction of the social policy of Iran to address the issue explicitly and have institutions and have instruments to fight the issue. One of them is definitely fighting unemployment and decreasing unemployment. Another one is developing the agricultural regions or deserted regions, for example, and addressing the issues of nomadic tribes and other groups of population which are historically sort of excluded from modern economic life. On the other hand, there is danger because, as I said, well, I was presenting these ideas on business opportunities to an audience, and they said, do you understand that if we develop modern retail, it will hit bazaar? Yes, it will. You cannot do anything about it. Bazaar is a very important social institution, historical institution, but in terms of effectiveness as a market institution, it definitely is not up to the modern standards. So if you bring modern retail to the country, it definitely hits the traditional retail. You can do nothing about it. It happened in US, for example, when Walmart came to small towns. First thing it did, it killed lots of small businesses, unfortunately. These can be addressed by certain social policies, and probably Bazaar can find a new place in the more modernized retail environment, but there are challenges for this. And this is just one example. Yes, please.
In one of your slides, you showed that Iran contains insufficient infrastructure. I don't know if you have any ranking point for the infrastructure in Iran. If it is below a certain points, you know, that you call it insufficient, or it's above certain points that you need, you know, to improve it. But in terms of, for example, transportation question, we have all means of, let's say, infrastructure there. We have the good basis, you know, for air transportation, railway transportation, road transportation, as well as sea transportation. We have all these bases, you know, in a very good amount of, let's say, improved way.
Yes.
And for example, 13,000 kilometers of railroads. I'm going to point out, you know, in my presentation later on, you know, to this point. But I wonder if you have any type of, let's say, ranking point, you know, for that kind of, let's say, infrastructure that you say insufficient.
Yes, and thank you, because I just missed the slide. I felt that I was missing something, but I found it in the other presentation. Definitely, infrastructure is a very big point. In terms of how it ranks now, you have in the report the data from there is logistics, global logistics index. There is a figure, and Iran is I would say, below average in this. And there are strong points of Iran, but overall, logistically, the country is not very advanced. Um, Geographically, it's on the crossroads of what you can call this part of Eurasia, and you're right that there are links. It's linked to two seas, and it's a very important link because basically with the modern intermodal ways of transportation, you can bring something down Volga River to Caspian Sea and then back all the way down to Indian Ocean, which can be quite an efficient route for certain things. Then if you go into this, here is Pakistan, then there is China, and China is aiming at establishing this as a quickest corridor to the Indian Ocean, because the traditional route is, first, it's longer, and second, for China, it's sort of geopolitically challenged because they feel that for whatever reason somebody can block the Malacca Strait, and then China will be excluded from large part of the world. So Iran is definitely a big part of this Chinese drive of One Belt, One Road, which aims like having corridors and multiple corridors from China to Europe, all across Eurasia. And there are many infrastructural projects in Iran in rail. There are projects in seaports because there are challenges. Certain Bandar Abbas has certain limitations in terms of volume of vessels. It's not very deep as a port, so you have to do some special things to, and as far as I understand, they're developing Chabahar as a new port to have bigger vessels coming to it. There is certain development on the Caspian side to link to Russia, and it's very important for agriculture because Iran is both exporting to Russia and importing from Russia grain, for example, and it goes through Caspian, etc. There are plans to link to Armenia and Georgia and then to Black Sea. So definitely there is massive development in all types of transport infrastructure in Iran. There is massive development in communication infrastructure. I guess there is massive development in financial infrastructure also. And I was surprised that you have your own authentic system of card payments. You don't accept international cards, but Iranians do have cards, they do have ATMs, so it's working locally, but just not switched to international payment systems. And one day it will get connected and it will be part of international financial infrastructure. So the opportunities are definitely there, and massive opportunities. Yes, sure. Yeah, thank you very much. It's a very, very valid comment. And definitely on the Russian side, the ports of Astrakhan, the ports of Makhachkala are not effective modern ports that they should be to facilitate the modern trade. And yes, there are also restrictions on certain movement of goods, or I mean, legal restrictions, certain movement of goods, or certain movements of finance. And we experienced this with Christopher. We had to pay him a small fee for participating here, and then we mentioned that he's working on a program doing business with Iran, and then we spent 3 weeks getting money which was in some financial limbo in Citibank in the US, and you could neither move it forward to Chris nor retrieve it back to us. We spent 3 weeks writing mails and sending contracts, etc., just because they spotted the word Iran on the bank wire. So, and unless you solve this, definitely, and this is something which should be solved on the European side of the business, at least with bank. There are no official sanctions or no official restrictions mostly for European banks to work with Iran, but many of them are trying to be on the safe side and be risk averse, and so they're really not very effective in doing the financial transactions. Yes.
I still have some kind of, let's say, comments on that explanation that this gentleman has made already, that if there is some kind of limitation between, let's say, the transportation between Iran and Russia through the Caspian Sea, that doesn't mean that the sufficient, let's say, logistics and the infrastructure does not exist on the part of Iran. When you take this question into mind, in terms of the volume of trade that we are making with Russia, it's not that much, or it does not have that much effect on the Iranian economy, because it's just consists only a small percentage of the total, let's say, trade that we make, with the Russians, but I would agree that the infrastructure needs, to be developed. Who doesn't need that? Everybody
Yeah, sure.
needs that,
Sure.
Whatever, at the present time, their logistic or their infrastructure is, they have to develop it, in, let's say, matching, with their increase in their trade activities, with the rest of the world. But, and so we do need, to do that. But at the present time, I'm just claiming that the necessary infrastructure in terms of transportation already exists there in a very good, let's say, amount that we can utilize it, in the development of the economy of the country, and go on with it, later on, to develop it as well.
Yes, I think the colleague made a point that exactly the bottleneck in Caspian trade, for example, was not on the Iranian side, but it was on the Russian side.
Discussion
Thank you. Yes.
I think some of comments that he mentioned, they are true, but I want to add a few comments. First, I am chairman of board of Khazar Shipping Lines Company. We have 24 ships in Caspian Sea. Most of them, they are Russian-made ships, which means that they are proper to work in Caspian Sea because they have been built in Volgograd company. I don't know the name of the company. We are working in Volga River also now. But Iranians, they are recognizing the Volga River as a territorial water of Russia. Caspian has a condominium regime. Iranian government believes Caspian is common share of the 5 littoral states. But Volga is a domestic water of Russia. Therefore, each time we ask permission to go, for example, from Volga to Don, and from Don to Azov Sea and Black Sea. The container also now are working daily foods, vegetables and fruits from Iran goes to Russia, and it is working. And the last point is that the Caspian shipping line or Khazar shipping line also has a port in northern part of Astrakhan, private port with 8 porteskele, we say in Persian, with 8 facilities for docking and also for loading and other issues of shipping. Sometimes some climate situation bans something. For example, a few months Iranian ships, they cannot work in Volga River and northern part of Caspian. But regularly we are working and trade is open now for all of issues. And the last point, North-South corridor is not only Caspian Sea. North-South corridor contains many roads, railways, airplanes, and also shipping lines. It is very important. As you mentioned, Russia, Azerbaijan, and Iran, they signed an agreement, and President Rouhani will go to Azerbaijan next week for final part of contract between Russia, Azerbaijan, and Iran to link Bandar Shahid Rajai in Persian Gulf, in Oman Sea, to the former Soviet railroads. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's really very interesting discussion of infrastructural opportunities and definitely infrastructure is essential for effective modern trade. Will there be, yes?
Vladimir, thank you very much. This was really interesting, and for me, as I seem not be the person who knows a lot about Iran and possibilities in Iran, it was really, really interesting. One slide that captured my attention, as a member of the DOC Research Institute responsible for international communications, for public relations, for government relations, is the slide with the number of youth population and the social networks that is growing. And yes, that's it. I know that there were some problems with Facebook. At least the situation was running.
They are blocked. Facebook, Twitter. First thing that disappears from your computer when you get into Iran.
Okay.
But they know how to do it anyway. Everybody's on Facebook.
I understand, because in Russia, for example, LinkedIn is blocked. Maybe here something else is blocked. I don't know. The general question is, how do you assess? On the one hand, you have a very big proportion of a young population under 30, 70, 60% of consumers under 30 years. This is huge. This is unimaginable. On the other hand, you say you have social networks which are booming, obviously. Is there anything you can say about this social marketing, social networks marketing, and digital economy as this specific perspective in Iran? And if yes, what are those social networks? What are the channels that can carry those informations currently?
Well, I would say we'll have an inside view on the digital economy and digital business later today, and probably my colleague is in much more, say, sound position to give you details and facts. I'm not much of an expert, partly because to access this part you have to be fluent in Farsi, which I'm not. From what I've seen in international reports and international studies, and there was, I can give you, I can show you, I have with me a very interesting overview of the young, quickly growing startups in Iran. There is a booming industry of startups. You have over 20,000 e-shops working on the market. They will probably consolidate one time, but now it's really like a very broad movement of digital grassroots startups and all types of businesses. I'm not quite sure how many of them use social media as platform, probably some others type of business also. But I'll share with you this article that it will give you some very interesting examples of the business models and business approaches. Yes, please. Chris, can you help me with this?
I'm happy to address some general comments.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also aware that according to our schedule, we're approaching our coffee break, so we should make this the last question. The issue of corruption has been a major part of the Iranian political discourse for the last 15 years, I'd say, and it has only really intensified. I don't have figures to hand, but from the way that it was discussed during the recent election campaign, I think all political leaders regard it as a major challenge. Whether that means that there is sufficient political will to tackle it is, of course, another matter. As we know from many countries around the world, speaking about corruption is not the same as ending it. Those international companies that are moving into Iran are extremely aware of this, and they're also extremely aware of the fact that their being foreign and not having experience on the ground could put them at a disadvantage in any form of dispute, contractual or otherwise, that comes up. And so the question of arbitration is extremely important. Our colleagues who are speaking after lunch will know more about the way that arbitration, what kind of arbitration techniques and methods are being adopted by, for example, it'd be interesting to know, as Total moves into the market under a new kind of oil deal, then what kind of arbitration is available to them, and I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that.
Thank you. I'll just can add a bit. In our previous event on Iran in Moscow, there was a French legal company called JIT participating, and they have established an office in Tehran. So now you can have, let's say, international legal counsel on the ground, which is very helpful to international business. In some rankings that you have, like doing business index, for example, imposing and enforcing contracts was placed as a strength of actually the country, which is probably a bit different for if it works for the foreign company or a domestic company, but overall, and I guess there are some figures in our report also on the legal system. The legal system is seen as being reasonably effective in the country and reasonably, say, transparent on the side of commercial deals. So, and there is always room for improvement, and there is always room for more. It's probably the lack of the effective, say, international communication that was the bottleneck here, because to get use of the legal system, you need somebody like a lawyer who will not just be inside in the system, but will also understand you and how your legal environment is working to provide the match between the two. And now with some international law firms establishing offices in Iran, hopefully there will be more of them. You will have this more of this interface between what you understand as legality in the West and what you understand as legality in Iran, and how they work combinedly. Yes, sure.
I fully back up your explanation that some of the, let's say, international law firms have already established themselves in Iran in order to take care of the, let's say, business disputes between the foreign investors or foreign, let's say, business people with the Iranian partners. And some of them have jointly, established firms, with the Iranian partners. And in addition to that, of course, I'm representing Chamber of Commerce. We recently established a center for arbitration, in our chamber. This is the second one of this arbitration center, that we have established, within the business society in Iran. There is one in the Iran chamber, and there is the second one that recently has been established in Tehran chamber. That means we are taking care of, all kinds of legal aspects of, any businesses that the let's say, foreign companies, would like, to take the advantage. And these are in accordance with the internationally accepted level of legal activities. And that means, of course, if there is any, let's say, disputes case, we take, let's say, judges in accordance with the, let's say, wishes of the clients, both from the foreign part and from the domestic one, and then an final arbitrator, in between. So these are things that are improving, in Iran business society, and then we can promise that these kind of, let's say, issues are being dealt with, properly and according to the, let's say, standards internationally accepted.
Thank you very much. So I guess this was the last question before the coffee break, and please, let's have some coffee, and if you have more questions, I will be happy, or Christopher will be happy to discuss them.